The silent room. The storm had been raging for hours, tearing through the small village like an angry beast. Thunder crashed overhead as Laura Thompson, a young journalist with a reputation for chasing dangerous stories, arrived at the edge of the village. Her editor had sent her here with a vague tip, a series of unexplained deaths that no one seemed willing to discuss. All she knew was that they were connected by one thing. Each victim had been found in the same room, their faces frozen in expressions of unspeakable terror. The rain pounded against the windshield of Laura's car, blurring her view of the village ahead. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here, to find the truth, no matter the cost. She parked her car near the village's only inn, a small, dilapidated building with a flickering sign that read the Silent Room Inn. The place seemed almost abandoned, its windows dark and its walls coated in a thin layer of grime, but there were lights on inside, dim and yellow, like a pair of watchful eyes. As Laura pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and stale air hit her like a wave. A man sat behind the counter, his face half hidden in shadows. His eyes, however, were sharp and wary, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was an older man, with silver hair and a weathered face, and he seemed to blend into the gloom of the inn like a ghost. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm looking for a room," Laura replied, forcing a smile. "I'm a journalist, here to cover some local stories." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to narrow ever so slightly. "Not much happens here worth writing about," he said. "You might be wasting your time." "I've heard about the deaths," Laura pressed. "The ones that happened in this very inn. People are saying they were unnatural." The man's face darkened. "People say a lot of things," he muttered. "But if you want a room, I've got one for you. Just don't go snooping around." Laura nodded, sensing that this man wouldn't reveal anything further. He handed her a key with a brass tag that read Room 13. Her heart skipped a beat. The silent room. The room where every victim had been found. She took the key, thanked the man, and made her way up the narrow staircase. The hallway was dimly lit, with old-fashioned wallpaper peeling off the walls. As she approached Room 13, a chill ran down her spine. She could hear a faint buzzing sound, like a distant hum, ignoring the unease building in her chest. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a wooden chair, and a window that overlooked the dense forest surrounding the village. The hum was louder now, almost like a whisper. She shook her head, chalking it up to nerves, but as she moved further into the room, the whisper seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like a distant voice trying to be heard. She set her bag down and began to inspect the room more closely. There was nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of a struggle, no hidden compartments, just the oppressive silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. She decided to set up her recorder, hoping to capture any sounds that might help her make sense of the mystery. As night fell, the rain continued to beat against the window, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Laura sat on the bed, flipping through her notebook, when she heard it again, the hum. This time, it was unmistakable, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. She looked around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. The room was empty. She stood up, her heart pounding. The hum grew louder, more persistent. She could feel it in her bones, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. She pressed her ear to the wall, listening intently. The hum shifted, became a whisper, a voice so faint she could barely make out the words. "Leave, now, before it's too late." Laura jerked back, her heart racing. Was she imagining things? She had heard about the effects of isolation and fear on the mind, but this felt different, more real. She grabbed her recorder and hit play. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, slowly, she began to hear it. The hum, the whisper. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. Her instincts kicked in. She needed to find out where the sound was coming from. She grabbed a flashlight and left the room, making her way down the dark hallway. As she approached the stairs, the hum grew louder, resonating through the floorboards. She followed the sound down to the ground floor, through a narrow passage that led to a door she hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and behind it, she could see a faint light flickering. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was larger than she had expected, filled with old books, strange devices, and what looked like ancient sound equipment. In the center of the room stood a large, wooden table covered in papers and strange diagrams, and at the far end of the room, she saw him, the man from the inn, standing with his back to her, seemingly lost in concentration. "What is this place?" Laura demanded, her voice echoing in the small space. The man turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You should have left," he said softly. "You don't understand what you stumbled into." What do you mean? Laura pressed, taking a step closer. What's going on here? What is this room? The man sighed and shook his head. It's too late for you now. He whispered. You've heard it. The hum, the voice. It's in you now, just as it was in them. Laura felt a cold dread wash over her. What do you mean? What have you done? It's not me, the man replied, his voice filled with a strange sadness. It's the sound, the silent sound. It's alive. It's been here for centuries, buried beneath the earth. We found it, but we didn't understand what we were dealing with. Now, it's in the walls, in the air. It wants to be heard, and those who hear it. He trailed off, and Laura felt a sudden, intense pressure in her ears. The hum was back, louder than ever, vibrating through her entire body. She could feel it in her teeth, her bones. The room seemed to spin, the light flickering, and the man's face twisted with fear. You need to leave, he said urgently, grabbing her arm. Now, before it's too late. But it was already too late. The hum became a roar, a deafening sound that filled her head, drowning out all thought. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The world around her seemed to dissolve, the walls melting away, and she felt herself falling into the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. Laura found herself standing in the middle of the empty room, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. The man was gone. The equipment, the papers, everything was gone. She was alone, surrounded by silence. She stumbled back up to room 13, her mind reeling. She needed to get out of here, but as she reached for the door, she realized with a start that it was locked. From the inside, she tugged at the handle, panic rising in her chest. But it wouldn't budge. The hum was back, softer now, almost like a lullaby. And then she understood. The silent room wasn't just a place. It was a state of being, a trap for the unwary, a place where the silence was alive, and it would never let her go. She sat down on the bed, her hands trembling, and began to laugh, a quiet, desperate laugh that echoed through the empty room. The hum grew louder, surrounding her, filling her mind with its endless, insistent sound, and in the distance, she heard a voice whispering, over and over, "Welcome to the silent room." Laura's story was never published. No one in the village spoke of the journalist who had come asking questions, and the room remained empty, waiting patiently for its next guest.